Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the Engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay? Every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Arts Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your guide to the whitetail woods. Presented by First Light, creating proven, versatile hunting apparel for the stand, saddle, or blind. First Light. Go farther, stay longer. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. This week on the show, I'm running Steve Sherk through our What Would You Do gauntlet, getting us insight into exactly how he'd handle some of the most challenging deer hunting scenarios I can throw at him. All right, and welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light and our Camo for Conservation initiative. Every piece of First Light gear in our whitetail camo pattern, that Spectre, a percent of each one of those sales is going to go back to the National Deer Association to help with their mission to fight for deer and deer hunters all across the country. Good stuff. So, this week on the show, we are continuing our What Would You Do series, in which we are running our guests during the month of August through a gauntlet of different situations, very specific hypothetical deer hunting scenarios to see how they would deal with them, what they would be thinking about, what their thought process would be, what they're going to consider, and how they would actually execute on that plan. And today our guest is Steve Sherk. Steve hails from the mountains of Pennsylvania, where he's made a name for himself chasing big woods, big mountain bucks across the state's vast public lands. And he's not just doing it successfully for himself, he's also leading dozens of other hunters to success through his outfitting business, Sherk's Guide Service. So in addition to all that, he is also somehow finding time to share his insights through articles he writes for North American Whitetail, all sorts of YouTube videos and podcasts, and plenty of other things too. So in short, Steve is a wealth of information and a go-to source for expert advice on hunting DIY public land bucks, which is why I'm so excited to get to talk to him today and to run him through the gauntlet. So that's what we're going to do today. I've got a lot of interesting questions and scenarios for him, but before we get into that, I do just want to pause briefly and thank all of you who came out to our Working for Wildlife tour this past weekend in Missouri. Man, it was awesome. We had a great showing, I think is the word I'm looking for here, a great showing, or turnout maybe would be the better choice, of people who came out to volunteer on this piece of public land there in eastern Missouri. It was a really cool event. We did a kind of a diverse array of different things. We were cutting invasive woody trees out of wetland areas, so removing willows and different things are going to crowd out that important wetland habitat in this area. We installed owl perches for short-eared owls, which are an important species of conservation need, I believe, out there in Missouri. And these owls are coming from across the continent and wintering here in this area. So we installed these different kind of wooden snag perches out in this prairie habitat. We were collecting seeds from some of the native prairie, in which they could use those seeds later for replanting and restoration of prairie habitat elsewhere. We were building wood duck boxes, repairing blinds they've got some pre-installed blinds for handicap access on this piece of public land. So there's folks working on that. All sorts of really good things going on that were going to improve wildlife habitat or improve the situation for hunters or other recreators out there, which was just a really cool thing to be a part of. I think everyone had a really good time. And after the volunteer day, there was a social event in which there was a number of different speakers, some from the Missouri Department of Conservation, and then myself. I shared a story and talked a little bit about stewardship and some of my experiences there. So, man, great time. Just wanted to, again, reiterate how much I appreciate everyone showing up for that, being a part of it. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. We've got 2 more events coming up. There's going to be one in Mississippi at the end of September, and then there's one in Kentucky in the middle of October. So if you're in those regions, stay tuned. More details to come. Looking forward to meeting plenty more of you, having a good time out there and doing something good for wildlife. So with that out of the way, I do think we should get to our main event today. We've got Steve Sherk. We've got some really interesting hunting scenarios, and we got some learning to do. Let's get to it. All right, here with me now, I have got the one and only Steve Sherk. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me.
I'm glad we're making this happen. You've made a name for yourself in recent years across the whitetail web, and you've got what seems like a really interesting skill set in your region, and you're doing it at a really consistent rate with a high quantity of success. And the fact that you also, run a guide service, I think makes you even more interesting, maybe than just a guy who hunts for himself, because you've got a whole different level of pressure and a whole different level of data points. I've always thought that outfitters have this really interesting, view of the world, because they aren't just observing what they see in the woods themselves. They talk to the different people that are hunting with them every day or every week, and it must be a boatload of information you're getting in. So all that said, I'm counting on you to be like an absolute banger of a guest for our gauntlet we're going to go through here today, because you have the minds of like hundreds of hunters in your head, I'm going to assume, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that you hit the nail on the head.
So the gist of what we're doing here is the what would you do gauntlet. So I'm going to run you through a bunch of specific hypothetical hunting scenarios. And then, I'm looking for you to walk me through how you would handle it, what you would do, why you would do it, and paint me as much of a picture of that as you can. So do you feel like you are up for that challenge?
I'm absolutely ready.
Okay. So in the interest of time, then, we're not going to beat around the bush. I do want to know if you've got a big giant buck you're excited about this season, but I'll just let you slip that in at some point through our conversation today, if and when you feel it's appropriate, because I want to get us right into the meat and potatoes of stuff. So let me just throw you kind of a softball-ish to start. I think it'll get us warmed up. Given your experience, a PA guy who's hunting all sorts of public land out there, it sounds like you've got a really in-depth knowledge of your home turf, of your corner of the state. You're working a lot of land. But what if I did this? What if I picked you up right now and said you had to move out of Pennsylvania? And I'm going to drop you down in maybe like North Carolina or Tennessee, still kind of that Appalachia kind of big timber mountain stuff, but brand new state, brand new area. And I said, all right, figure it out. It's late August. You've never stepped foot out here. Walk me through how you would approach your scouting and prep if you had to start from scratch in, the National Forest down in Tennessee.
Yeah. Just one other question to that. Is this like a pre-scouting mission weeks ahead of the hunt? Or are we talking like coming in 5 days before the hunt?
Yep. So let's say you are moving end of August. So right about now when people are listening, let's say that's when you show up. And I guess Tennessee's season, though, they open pretty early.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, so you're going to be, pretty, if not seasons on, it's coming up very quickly. And so
Okay.
so walk me through the prep, the scouting, the prep, or anything that might happen before you actually get out there with a bow.
Yeah, no, that's even though I'm kind of stuck to my home area, there's so much ground here that I'm always learning anyways. And I'm a big boots on the ground type of scouter. I've learned on public land, you kind of have to look for different things that a lot of people are, not really willing to put the footwork and the sweat and equity into to try to stay away from other hunters and try to find deer and individual bucks that aren't getting pressured. I also think that a lot of these bucks are catching on to the trends and the patterns and what everyone else is doing. There's so many of these podcasts out there and so much information that it's like there's always something new every year that someone like me or another well-experienced hunter starts mentioning that's working for them, and then everyone catches on to that. So
Yeah.
I'm always trying to evolve and do things differently. So I'd be going into that area looking for overlooked areas, maybe some more remote stuff, hard to access. But I'd be doing a lot of boots on the ground. Probably the first thing I'd be looking for is trying to see what food sources are in the area. Is there mass crops? I tend to stay away from clear cuts more than what I used to. I used to love hunting clear cuts, but everybody's hunting them because they're so easy to find from e-scouting that, once again, it's just another thing you kind of have to adjust to. So I'd be really spending a lot of time in these more remote, hard accessed areas, looking also for high stem count areas. Be spending a lot of time in higher elevations trying to figure out, some bedding areas and just covering ground very thoroughly. If it's late August, early September, we're probably going to start to see a little bit of buck sign. I think at that time, too, you can catch a buck on a decent daytime feeding pattern. So I'd probably be trying to find somewhere where, food and bedding was kind of close, maybe find some hot sign in those areas. But overall, more than anything, I would be looking for those more remote, hard to access. That way, especially, when you throw hunting pressure in the mix, that completely changes up, a buck's his patterns and the way he's going to act. So it's so much easier when you can find a buck that no one knows about, no one's hunting, no one's bothering, and you can catch him doing his usual thing. It's much easier to read his mind and what his next step's going to be. So I think if that answers that question decent enough, or if you want to add on to it, I think that's where I'm at.
Yeah, so I'm curious, a day of boots on the ground like that, let's say, does that look like you picking a chunk and like grid searching everything in that area, or do you go into it with like some highlighted places on a map and you're just walking from this place that looks good to this place that looks good to this place? How does that actual day usually play out?
Yep. I mean, the first thing, I'm really only looking at a map like the first time picking out an area, and all I really look for anymore is hard to access or areas that may not have a lot of hiking trails, or especially a lot of roads, or somewhere where there's pretty good stretch of ground that you really got to put the footwork in to get to. I used to not be that way, but like I said, that's what I've had to do over the years as things started. I'm not going to say that the hunting pressure in my area is getting worse. It's just hunters are getting smarter, reading maps and figuring out where they want to be. That I've kind of just banked off of that change and adjusted to it. But yeah, just that first time, I'm going to look on a map, and I'm not looking for much for terrain features right off the bat, or I'm not doing any e-scouting where I can really see what the habitat looks like. I'm just looking for a really hard to get to area, difficult terrain, because almost always that's where you're going to find a really big deer, especially nowadays. It may not be the best habitat or the most perfect ridge to bed on, but his number one need is his security and getting away, from other hunters. So I'm looking for somewhere like that.
Okay, so if I were to move your start date up from, end of August, and instead I said you're not showing up till October, and like it's hunting season, it's on.
Yep.
Would you still go and do this major boots on the ground, cover everything, and just like do a rip off the Band-Aid kind of thing? Or would you approach your scouting and intel much more conservatively because, it's hunting season?
I think I'd be a little more cautious. It also depends on what stage of October we're talking about. If it's early October, that's when I'm even more cautious because it really seems like bucks in my area, they really shrink up their home range then. They've just broke up from bachelor groups or solo. They're kind of just in a new world at that time, and they really seem to be really skittish. So I'd be a little bit more careful then. I'd probably focus more on high elevation bedding and see if I could find some hot sign around the edge of those bedding areas, and maybe try to catch that deer, more on an evening feed pattern, coming out of that bedding area, going to a food source. But if it's like mid to late October, I'll get a little more aggressive because that's when I start to see bucks doing what I call the rut shift, where they're kind of break out of that solo bedding feed pattern and they start paying, more attention to what does are doing in their home range, and they will, one day they might bed in one place, one day they might another because, they're starting to expand and, look around. So I don't think you're as intrusive that time of year. Plus, there's a lot of sign popping up in areas, and I think it's a really good time to hunt scrapes and rub lines then. So I think you can be a little more aggressive at that time of year just to find hot sign.
Okay. Let's play that out a little further then. So let's imagine you're in there in October doing your scouting, and let's say you stumble onto like a no questions asked big buck bedroom. You get in there and all the alarm bells start flashing. Like you're like, oh man, like I'm in it. This is it. What do you do in the moments that follow and then leading up to whenever you might hunt it? And I guess I will preface that by saying, could you also describe for me what would you need to see for those kinds of alarm bells to go off? So what would it be that would make you think, oh, wow, I'm in a big buck bedroom in the kind of place you hunt? And then what would you do, following that?
Yeah.
Either from a scouting or hunting perspective.
Yeah. So most likely I'm probably not going to run into a bed, but I'm going to run into signs. The only reason why I'm probably not going to look for a bed is I don't really want to bump a deer out of his bed at that time. I'm not saying that I do believe that you can bump and still, dump or whatever they call it, bump and dump, but I really don't want to bump that deer out of that area if I can. So usually what I'll do is, I'll try to get on the fringes of what I think is a bedding area, and that's where I tend to find quite a bit of sign. I call it like a neutral zone where a buck might have a patch of cover that he's claiming, and he's got several beds in, but you'll get a lot of deer activity on that edge. It's kind of almost like a transition area that, deer may not want to go in there and disturb him because they might get their butt kicked, especially a younger buck. But they'll skirt those edges, and that's where that buck's going to throw a lot of that sign out because he's telling other deer and he's communicating with other deer that that's his area. It's kind of like putting posted signs on the edge of your property, or, on your property boundary. That's kind of what that deer is doing. So that's what I'd be looking for some hot, big sign, on the edges of thick cover, high elevations especially, because at least in where I'm from, probably 90% of our buck bedding is on the upper third. So that's, even though that be a new area to me, I would relate my past experiences here and find those high elevation covers. But then I'm also looking for an active scrape on that edge too. What I have found that inside of those bedding areas is, a lot of people associate bedding as bedding only. I find that bucks do a ton of feeding in those bedding areas, and even though it might not be their primary food source, seems like they don't come out of there as hungry as what some people think. And they love to work like an active scrape kind of in that neutral zone area. Even though he might be heading to a primary food source, he might also be going to that primary food source just for the fact that he wants to socialize with other deer in his area, see what, maybe what competition he has as well. But I've done really well trying to find scrapes on the edge of that bedding, especially if it's on a trail and enter an exit trail right on the edge. Like, that's been a dynamite spot for me in the past. That's probably where I would set up. The biggest thing, though, is going to be in the mountains is, how close do I think I am to where that deer is actually bedding, and is the wind going to be consistent or not? It's so hard in the mountains sometimes to find consistent wind. So that's going to be a big part into it also. But then also sometimes the way I look at it, and even here, because I may get to hunt a few times in the early part of the season, and that's it. I do landscaping, so I'm still a little bit busy then. Sometimes I'll just gamble, like, this is my time to hunt. I may have 3 days, and I might just, especially if I was traveling on a hunt, maybe I only have 5. If I didn't see the right wind and I felt there was, maybe only one good spot to kill that deer, I may just go in there late, like the last hour when the winds die down. That's what I tend to find is right before sundown, you'll see a break in the wind, and a lot of the, the activity or air activity is more thermal based then anyways. So I might try to find somewhere where I'm on the downhill side of that bedroom and those thermals are starting to drop. But I'd probably be willing to gamble in a short period of time anyways, and see what happens. But I'm looking for the hot sign on the edge of thick cover, especially an active scrape. Because that's where that deer is going to want to, before he heads to that primary food source, he's going to want to see who's been around the fringes of his area.
So in that situation, when you're scouting your way through, you come across this edge where it's like gets really thick, and all of a sudden you see some good rubs and big scrape. When you see that first good sign where you get the alarm bells and you're like, oh wow, here we are, is that as far as you go? Because you don't want to spook them, so you don't want to go any further? Or do you say, oh wow, I think there's probably a buck bedded, this seems like I'm entering a bedroom. Will you explore any more of the periphery to try to figure out where his main entry and exits out, or to see if there is more sign anywhere else? Basically, are you looking for the perfect spot right away, or do you say, all right, this is good enough, that's all I need to know, I'm stopping now and I'm going to set up somewhere around here?
It would depend on if I was going to plan to hunt that area that day. If it was a day before, I'd probably scout the whole perimeter of the cover just to see. I mean, sometimes you think you found that magic spot, but sometimes the grass is greener, a couple 100 yards away too. So, but if I was, got in there late, it's 2:00 and, I found something pretty good and I wanted to hunt that evening, then I would set up right then, if I felt everything was right as far as wind and thermals, and, depending also on how much time I had to hunt there. But yeah, it's just going to depend on, when I find that sign. But like I said, day before, I'm going to scout a little bit thoroughly. Also, too, because it's probably a place I've never scouted ever, and I'm just learning this area, I would then do a little bit of e-scouting, because I tend to find that bucks like to bed on the edge of elevation drops. So if I, looked on my phone or a map and I was like, well, there's a couple more good shelves up above me, I would prefer to set up within the cover than on the edge. I tend to find a lot of these bucks don't come out of those thickets until after dark. But you'd be amazed how many kind of use the outer inside edge of like a staging area. He'll kind of wait till, he'll browse his way out to, maybe to where he can see the open woods, but doesn't quite pop out till dark. I would try to push it a little bit if I felt, if there was a good flat there that I could cut in on and too close to an elevation drop I thought that deer was going to bed on, I would prefer to set up in the cover. You also got to keep noise in mind too. Like, that deer's also not going to come, if it's like a real, thick clear cut or just a thicket, it's so hard to sneak into those spots quietly. Sometimes you have no choice to set up on the edge, but there's so many different factors you gotta think about and make decisions on that. I think you are a little bit better to back off and maybe hopefully you're within 100 yards of where that deer is laying. But if you think you can sneak another 20, 30, 40 yards further, I mean, it doesn't sound like much, but telling you, just getting in that cover a little bit could be the factor between ever seeing that deer and getting an opportunity. So if I can sneak in there quietly, I'm going to hunt in that cover.
I like it.
Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay? Every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Art Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.
All right, let's take you back home. Let's say you're back on your home turf. And I guess let me clarify one thing. Is it right that you run more than 150 trail cameras on any given year, somewhere in that ballpark?
Is it true, you mean? Or is it unethical?
No, not an ethics question. I want to make sure I got my numbers right. You've got a lot of cameras out, right?
Yeah, last year I had around 175 out last year. And that's just also to clarify, that's in about a 30-mile stretch too. It's not like I got 170 cameras on a few square miles. So it's in a big area.
Yep. Okay. So with that in mind, you've got 175 some trail cameras scattered across the mountains out there. You've got a plan in place. You've scouted all off season. You're going into the season with a specific set of target bucks maybe you're after. And let's say it's that early-ish part of October. So you've got some stuff with regular work going on still, but you do have some spots to hunt, some opportunities. And let's say you're about to head in to hunt. And what you find out, though, is just before your big, swipe, you're going to take it a couple target bucks, you get a brand new deer showing up. Brand new buck you've never seen before, a buck that kind of blows everything else out of the water. So we're going to another level of deer where all of a sudden he consumes you and you realize, whoa, like this is a deer that I have to drop everything else to try to get a crack at him because this would be by far the biggest deer we've ever heard of out here. Yeah. How does your trail camera strategy or placement or checking of cameras change in this case, where you had stuff everywhere, you had a plan in place, you had your places in specific spots for reasons, but now all of a sudden, new buck in a place that maybe you don't have covered terribly well? What do you do now in that situation to figure out this brand new deer in a new set of circumstances?
Yeah. Are you saying that maybe I just had a random camera in there and all of a sudden I got a picture of this mega deer?
Yeah. Let's say you've got one
first
of those.
First of all, it would.
Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah. It would depend on the time of day or night when I got a picture of that deer and how I would approach it. I mean, if it's early October and I get a daytime picture of that deer, I'm going to say like, holy cow, I'm close to where this deer is bedding. If it's a night picture, that's a whole different ballgame. Even though I would say that time of year, they're not covering a ton of ground, that deer could be 2 or 3 miles away from where it's bedding. I'm a huge nut as far as how trail cam data goes. And, I try to take every little piece of intel of any photo I get, so
I like that about you.
I'll make this a harder question and say that, I got a picture of this deer at midnight and it looks like he's traveling, east to west. I'm thinking, okay, cause if it's in my home range, even though, I don't know every square inch, but yet I know my woods really, really well. I'm going to try to figure, okay, what was on this deer's mind? Where was he coming from? Where was he going? At midnight, he could be doing a lot of different things, but chances are he's thinking food more than anything, primary food source. So I'm watching, you know, is this deer possibly heading towards a primary food source? Very likely. Or, was that deer heading towards water? But I'm trying to put where he's, what was on that deer's mind? Where was he going? And especially the same thing, maybe where he was coming from. The direction of travel is huge for me, and as well as too is maybe paying attention to the weather, the upcoming weather, and what that was going to be. A lot of times, in a wind shift or weather front, that deer may go on even a little excursion during a big weather front that time of year too. But I'm just basically trying to get as much information out of that trail cam photo as I possibly can. And then I will start to make up a game plan from there. If you want to add to that question a little bit, it might be better. But like I said, I take every photo. I'm not going to say little bucks and does, but anytime I get a big deer on camera, night, day, it doesn't matter. I'm taking information from that, and I'm trying to think what that deer was doing and where that deer was coming from.
Okay, so you get this photo, you analyze it, you're asking yourself all those questions. The next day or the next chance you get when you have the right circumstances to go in there, Are you going to do anything to try to put more pieces of the puzzle together? Like, will you go and add a bunch of new cameras into that zone to complete the picture, or will you go do some additional on-the-ground scouting in that zone to try to learn more? Like, is there anything like that you'll do next?
Yeah, the biggest individual deer that I've ever hunted, I've always clustered cameras in those areas. What I've found is, especially in the big woods, it's not like these deer are on the same path every day. However, there's these little zones of movement that that you're going to find them taking advantage of, especially closer to daytime hours. And early October, you might hear a lot of people talk about hunting food sources, but where I'm from, it's all, basically bedding, getting as close to that bed as you possibly can. Like, I don't find bucks in the daytime unless I'm close to bedding. So I'd be clustering cameras, around where I think that deer is bedding. But I'd also be real careful on checking them too. When I cluster cameras, I'm usually also trying to bank off of, I said it like this in to other people, other podcasts. Look at it like how a baseball defense or baseball field is set up. You got left, right, center field, you got the infield, and then you got, home plate. I'm going to be using cameras and focusing more these camera checks like in the outfield of the field versus home plate. I may sneak a camera into where I think I'm going to kill that deer, and that most of that data may be more for the fact that if I don't kill that deer this year, I'm going to learn a lot from that spot. But I try to back off on checking cameras and, in spots I don't want to put a lot of intrusion and that, want to have less impact on. And I try to have more of, these safer intel areas that maybe that deer is coming in at night, but yet I'm still not that far from where he's bedding. I would say like left, right, and center field. I'd be trying to play those outer cameras, and then based off what I'm seeing on those, I'm trying to bank off of, okay, can I get a better idea where this deer is coming from, direction of travel, and those things. And a lot of times, if I see what I want on that outside edge of cluster of cameras, I'll dive in towards home plate, make a move on them.
All right, so 2 follow-ups. Number 1, when you're going to go in season to add new cameras or to check cameras, are you waiting for any particular conditions? So what needs to be present, either weather-wise or anything like that, time of day, whatever, to go in and actually do something like that, especially if you're going to push in tighter, closer to home plate. And then part 2 would be, for the folks who aren't familiar with your typical trail camera setup, we should probably just cover that off too. Like, what are you usually putting these cameras on? Talk to me about how you're doing that in a way that you think gets you the right intel without, spooking deer.
Yeah. Well, most of my inventory comes from creek bottoms because there's hardly any buck bedding here in creek bottoms. I mean, that's the lowest elevation. Like I said, most of our bucks are bedding in high elevation. So mostly all that activity outside of the rut is at night. So that's where I get a lot of my inventory, especially creek bottoms generally have the main water source. It's a big congregation socializing area. So, usually in a good creek bottom, you're going to have some really good primary scrapes down there that you can get some really good inventory and pretty decent intel also. Like, say like it's early October, probably a lot of times too about, 8, 9 o'clock, a mature buck will work his way down in that bottom. And if you can find where you got trails coming off hillsides and mountains, and you can start to get an idea of where that deer is coming from, just off of the, how he's entering that scrape or walking that trail. So that's where a lot of my scouting is, or checking cameras. Most of it's done in the creek bottoms because, like I said, I have very little impact. But then I also got cameras further up towards bedding, and that's going to be also based on what I'm seeing, down in those creek bottoms. If I'm seeing, where this huge buck is, hitting this primary scrape down in this particular spot in this creek bottom 3-4 times a week, coming from the same trail every night, I'm going to know what that ridge is like, that he's coming on. I'm going to know, where if there may be another secondary food source he's hitting. That might be where I'm going to put a camera midway up. I may hunt that deer midway up, or, especially I'm going to very likely know where that deer is bedding. It's just because you're talking about areas that I know like the back of my hand. But I would be, like I said, be putting a lot of cameras down in creek bottoms where I'd have less intrusion. But then when I start to see something consistent, then I start working my way up towards bedding further based off what I'm seeing on the cameras.
So you mentioned that baseball diamond shape for the way you're spreading your cameras. Yep. I was kind of envisioning that as being like a horizontal baseball diamond and like you're working your way across mountains, but it kind of sounds like maybe it's an upside down. Is it actually that usually home plate is like high up the mountain where they're bedded,
exactly,
and then it widens out going down?
Exactly. Yep. Because sometimes it backfires because home plate is more based on my prediction. Mm-hmm. However, sometimes too, I've got history with a deer where I really am confident I figured out where he's bedding, but I keep that, I'll keep one camera up near bedding anyways. But those other cameras further out towards heading down the ridge and, down towards the bottom, that's where I can really get a lot of inventory and intel and have less impact on, what that deer, honestly, some people might disagree, but mature bucks, and I bet you would agree, they don't mind human scent and human activity in those nighttime areas because they know humans aren't in there at night. Mm-hmm. They have those areas where they want to feel more secure, and that, further up in their bedding areas, those are the areas you got to be more cautious about. But further away, where I have these other cameras that I'm getting intel from, that it works out perfect that way because I can be a little bit more messy, and that deer doesn't even realize that I'm using all those cameras to zero in on them, but yet I'm not going in those core areas or those hot bedding areas. I'm basing everything off of those cameras further back, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Let's pivot a little bit here. I might come back to cameras because you've got a lot of interesting ideas on the camera front, but let's shift a little bit. Keep you on your toes. Let's imagine you're hunting late October, not like the very end of it, but let's say somewhere between like the 20th and the 25th. Okay.
Yep.
And you're hunting close to one of these buck bedrooms. You're pushing closer to home plate, and you're going for a hunt. You're all set up. Things are looking great. Conditions are good. Last 15 minutes of daylight, the buck shows up, but he's downwind of you, and you see him wind you and turn tail and take off the other direction.
Yep.
What do you do with that situation from there? Are you going to try to keep hunting that buck? Do you give up on him and go somewhere else the next couple days? What's your thought process and plan for the coming days after that?
Yeah. No, I'd absolutely hunt that buck again. Very likely in that general area. However, I would not hunt that deer from the same tree. That's anytime I find that deer catching on to me, even if it's, other deer that I spooked, I'll generally make some slight adjustment, try not to hunt the same tree, just for the fact that, deer start to recognize pretty quickly that they're being hunted, especially on public land. I've left tree stands and trees, and you can just start to see how, and even in the guiding business as well, we'll have a client, hunt a spot 2-3 days in a row and start to notice deer skirting around him. But I would definitely hunt that deer again, but I wouldn't hunt it from the same spot. That deer, when he comes in next time, will probably take a chance and go further out around from where he smelled that human scent. I may set up, you said how many yards away, like 50 or 80 yards or something?
I didn't actually specify how far away he was.
But if it was out of range, I would probably set up closer to where that deer was, thinking that deer is going to maybe skirt around a little bit further. Especially that time of year too, right before the rut, gets real crazy and they start ranging. I'm willing to gamble a little bit more because that deer may not be patternable much longer. So, I would gamble, but I would probably hunt that deer from a different tree.
How soon would you go back in there after him? Would you go that very next day and make that move?
I probably would go right back in the next day if everything seemed right. Usually that time of year as well, I'm hunting somewhat of a pattern of a buck. Maybe an active scrape line or rub line that I'm getting a deer on pretty consistently. So it's probably most likely going to be some consistency of a pattern where I'm like, I can't afford to miss out on this because once again, it's not going to last.
Yeah. So speaking of observing deer doing something and making adjustments, let's run you through one of my favorite things to beat myself up over the head with, and let's put you into November, and you're setting in a spot that you don't know super well. Maybe this is one of the first times you've hunted in this little region, but you feel good about it. Like you feel like you're in a spot for the right reason, and it's the rut. You're waiting for something to come cruising through or whatever. And you're sitting there in the morning, we'll say an hour or two into your morning sit, and you see a shooter buck come moving through, but he's out of range. And then a half hour later, you see another buck come through and do the same thing. Do you do anything with that intel? Or do you move, or do you stay where you're at?
Absolutely. When you see in the rut, 2 bucks on the same trail, probably 9 out of 10 times there was a doe that they were following. And I've made the mistake before. And I tell my clients that too. And that's especially why, we love mobile setups, is if there's very, very unlikely chance you're going to have 2 bucks take the same trail for no reason. There's a good chance there's either a hot doe or a doe that's getting pretty close to coming into heat that they were following that trail, immediately set up and, somewhere downwind or, in a safe spot too. You don't want to be set up, 10 yards off of it either. But you'd be amazed how many times we've had success doing that, especially that time of year. You don't have to see the doe. That doe could have came by at 4 a.m. before you got there, but you see something consistent. I also tell my clients, and it's the same strategy myself, like if you see anything consistent, 80 yards out, but every deer doing the same thing, multiple deer, I always move because generally it's not just random. There's a reason for that. You're hunting that spot for the first time. You may not realize that you're not quite in the zone of how deer use that area. You're kind of observing that area off of that first sit. So any consistencies you see, move on to them as fast as you can, because especially where I'm from in the big woods, a good stand here isn't a stand you see a deer from every day anyway. So, if the action's good, get on it while you can, because it may not be any good there the next day.
Yeah. So let's say to be really specific, let's say this happened at, 8:30 in the morning when you saw that second buck come through, we'll say. Would you literally move like as soon as that buck gets out of sight, or would you wait till midday when stuff's slowing down and you feel like there shouldn't be as many deer on their feet and then tear down and reset up? How quickly do you want to make that change?
As soon as that buck's out of sight is when I would move. I mean, I would be real careful, listen, watch really good. I might even glass, all around me just to make sure nothing's coming. But I mean, if it is a hot doe, it could be a minute or two, or I mean, God knows when something is especially, once again, and, because I relate a lot to what we're talking about, big woods and, lower deer densities, less does, you might have 5 or 6 does in a square mile. And one of those does comes into heat. Every buck in that area is most likely going to know it. So you want to get on that hot route as soon as you can. You can't afford to wait till midday and, hope nothing comes, especially in the rut too. Like, there's just as good of a chance of killing a buck at noon or 2 p.m. in the rut as there is at, any other time. So yeah. I'm going to jump on that, that sequence and consistency of movement as fast as I can, especially based on my own experiences guiding and hunting. Like, we've had a lot of success doing that. I highly recommend it.
Okay. All right. So then the next thing that might hypothetically happen is going to be another one of those head scratchers, or get you stuck there spinning your wheels, which is you tear down your set, you move to this new area, and you get to within the, spot you think you want to be, and you're stuck trying to pick the right tree. And
yeah.
Let's say there is there's a tree that is in range, and it's going to set up nicely for you as far as giving you a good, easy shot to that trail that you saw those 2 bucks coming through. Problem with it, though, is that there's 2 things wrong with this tree. There is a little bit of a trail downwind of it. So there's like a secondary trail kind of downwind. So you've got like a chance that maybe, you're going to have deer come downwind. The second thing wrong with it is that it is a beanpole. So it's like straight up, there's almost no cover. You might be left out to dry up there. So you could pick this spot that's like the perfect location for the tree as far as giving you the easy shot, but you're not going to have good cover, and there's a chance that maybe there might be some other deer passing downwind. Or you can go and you can kind of move out from that spot, and now you're going to be 43, 42 yards, maybe 44 yards, somewhere in that ballpark away from that main trail you saw. But it's a big oak tree with a bunch of cover on it, and now you're downwind of any kind of trail that you saw when you were walking through there. So do you pick the spot that gives you the slam dunk 20-yard shot, but it's a little bit riskier for those 2 reasons? Or do you say, I want the safest tree possible, and I'm going to, hope to make this shot work, or call the buck in an extra 10 yards or something like that?
Yeah, at about 40 yards or a little over, I would rather take the safer route. Just for the fact that, I would say most archery hunters as well, like, I almost feel like, ethical shooting is starting to reach out there more than ever. And I'm not saying that I think everyone should be shooting deer 50, 60, 70 yards. I mean, that's to each his own, but, a 40, 45 yard shot is very makeable. I would set up taking the safer tree with a little more cover. I kind of like to stay back anyways. Just especially for the fact that even downwind, or having the wind in your favor, but a deer coming in really close to you, a lot of people don't realize that you kind of have like a zone of scent scattered all around the base of your tree anyways. So I like to be 30, 40 yards back. I just feel a lot safer. I feel like there's a lot more room, to make less mistakes, or for a deer to catch on to your mistakes. I'm going to take that big oak that has the cover, 40, 45 yards off. I'd rather take a little bit further of a shot than gamble, being too close and that deer catching on to me.
Okay. All right. That's a fair choice to make. I think you passed the test.
Okay.
How about this one? You've got a spot, you're heading into hunt, and it's a slam dunk. You feel really strongly about it. You have trail camera intel that backs up your location, and you're heading in with high hopes. But as you head in, let's say it was kind of like a wet day before, maybe. So there's a like soft ground. As you're heading in and you're nearing your location, you see fresh boot tracks. And you find out someone else has been somewhere around here. Do you go through with your plan, or do those fresh boot tracks in your zone make you pivot in any kind of way? What do you do?
Yeah. Well, it would depend. If it was just fresh boot tracks, in the mud, I'm probably going to gamble and hope that maybe somebody's just passing through. Another thing where I come from, there's a lot of human activity that's even non-hunting related. There's a lot of foresters, there's biologists. I mean, you name it. So there's a chance that it's not even a hunter. And there's so much area anyways and I feel very confident a lot of my best spots are overlooked spots that, not to brag, but I don't think a lot of hunters thinking the same things and the same setups as me anyways. Now, if there's snow on the ground and I see boot tracks, I would literally follow those boot tracks a ways. Heck, I might even try to catch up with the hunter just to see what they're doing in there. Are you setting up somewhere or whatever? I would literally do that. I would rather, lose a little bit of hunting time and just figure out what this hunter's doing than risk anything. But it would depend on different scenarios. But if I just see sign of human activity, I'm still going to hunt that area. It's a very common situation.
Okay, what about a slight variation of that? What if you're up in the tree waiting on your buck, and here comes Joe Hunter walking by you, and maybe he doesn't walk right into where you think the core is, but he walks kind of past you, he waves, then he keeps on going and kind of is cruising along the side of where you were hoping a good deer might come from. Do you bail or do you stick it out?
Usually I'll move, but I might not move real far. I'm real careful about entering my spots with ground scent. A lot of times I'm jay hooking or doing something real out of the ordinary to make sure that if I think deer, are working this particular scrape or whatever, I try to keep my human scent off of where the deer are traveling. So, if somebody's going through kind of the hot route that I'm hunting, they just went through, I'm definitely going to get down and adjust to it. But good chance I'm not going to leave the area either. I may, unless that person, followed that trail and came from that route from 100 some yards this way, 100 some yards that way, I might then leave the whole situation. But chances are I should be able to find somewhere without that fresh ground scent. And, I'm pretty quick about, getting set up. I mean, I can get out of my train up in another, 15 minutes at the most or whatever. So it's really not a huge deal as far as losing time, but it's going to be based on where exactly that hunter came from and where they went, if they left me any room to adjust or not.
Okay. So another thing that you've talked a lot about in the past that I've really found interesting is your, really in-depth trail camera analyses you've done, where you've looked at trends across, your hundreds of cameras and seen how different dates and different weather systems and things have impacted the deer activity you see on camera. And one of the things I've heard you mention a lot is just the impact of those cold fronts. When those cold weather systems come through, the trigger that seems to pull for deer.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about what you would do when you have the opposite situation. For a lot of us this past year, we had a hot rut. That first, depending where you are in the country, for a lot of people, it's like end of October, first week of November. I was stuck with 7 straight days of 70 degrees or more. So let's say it's that, last couple days of October or first, week of November. And let's say this is your, let's say you're not guiding and you have time to hunt during that week and you're stuck with that weather forecast. Does that change your hunting strategy in any kind of way? If so, how? If not, why not?
Yeah, it absolutely does. The whole rut, some people assume that maybe the way I explain it is that these deer don't rut at all. And that's definitely not the case. Even, 70 or degree day or warmer, there's still rutting going on. You can still have success. It's just, chances are a little slimmer when a buck's moving a lot less. There's a couple different, scenarios that seem to work in warm weather. Here, people would be surprised, but, this is even based some off trail camera observations too, is real hot days. Like we're finding creek bottoms are really good, cruising areas. Our creek bottoms are, usually pretty heavily loaded with like a lot of evergreen and hemlock. So it's generally cooler down there. Plus, got to factor in that, when bucks are rutting hard and they got those winter coats on, they're thirsty. I would, we're definitely focusing more around creek bottoms on those hot days. For guiding myself, I'd be keeping that in mind. Another thing too is it still seems like there's activity close to bedding, which is pretty normal. Seems like a lot of bucks like to, bed maybe just 200-300 yards at the most, or more like maybe 100 yards downwind of doe bedding. I'd be focusing more around those doe bedding areas, on those warmer days. You can't expect it to be like that hot all day action. It's a sluggish movement on those warm days. You got to be a little bit more patient, but you can still have success. I'm not going to say we have our best success those days, and certainly don't get as excited. But, we got paying clients that come in and they can't predict what the weather is going to be a year in advance when they book their hunt. So we've had to come up with ways to still be successful. And like I said, you can still have success. You just got to either set up around bedding or, like I said, those creek bottoms with a good water source. That's something we've really found to be really good in those hot days during the rut.
Yeah. So speaking of those kind of sluggish movement days during the rut, like you kind of mentioned, even when conditions are pretty good, it seems like you can certainly have these like great periods of movement and then like really slow days during the rut. Even though you would think like, oh, it's the rut, it should be incredible. At least my experience has often been that there'll be these periods of where it's dead. It's either hot or it's not. So I'm curious, if you are in a situation where it's, November 7th or 8th, one of those days that a lot of people say is like the best day of the whole hunting season for a lot of people, and you've sat in a location for 3 days in a row, and I've heard you talk about your 3-day rule. So if that's something you still do, I would be interested in you explaining that a little bit for folks. But let's say you've done your 3-day rule. You've sat for 3 days in a spot that should be amazing. You feel really confident, but it's been dead. How do you pivot based on that? Or do you, for some reason, stick it out longer?
Yeah. No, I would never, 3 days of dead movement. I'm looking for something else. I'm probably also looking for a completely different type of setup. Maybe I was in a creek bottom. Now I'm going to maybe set up closer to some bedding or a food source. Just based on, there's probably a good chance too that, something changed as well as, within their environment. A lot of times too, what I'll do is grid search for a hot doe too. It may not even be, trail cam picks that time of year, but if you can get on a hot doe, around that, then that's a pretty good period for does coming into heat, that 6th, 7th, and 8th. Just trying to be in that zone. That's another thing that happens that time of year is you might see a little bit less cruising, at least up my way around that time period. And it's all centralized based on, where that doe in that area is, coming into heat. That's where all the bucks are going to be. Like I said, but just at least do something different. Whatever, it may be, you said even if it was a prime, more of a prime weather day and, things still weren't working right, there's a good chance that, you just don't have it figured out. Maybe the deer were eating white oaks and they're starting to become pretty thin. Now they're switching to red oaks, or, just do something completely different. But definitely after 3 days of nothing, I totally recommend. It's not just, eventually maybe something's going to come through, but, you've put a lot of human scent, a lot of intrusion into that particular spot. It's time to readjust and come up with a new game plan.
Now, if it had been just 1 day or 2 days, though, do you still strictly follow that 3-day rule?
No, not always 3 days. Sometimes too. I might plan to hunt a spot for 2 days because say it's like a travel corridor or cruising area, and I got 2 real good prime weather days. Like I love to hunt travel corridors, maybe a pinch point or just a past cruising route I've had good experience on. But those routes only seem to be used on those prime days. You know, it doesn't always matter whether it's November 1st or the 15th, but it just seems like our deer, and based on a lot of my research, like, you get what I call 30-30 weather days when you got at least high temps in the 30s or better, or lower, I should say, and low temps 32 or lower. Those travel corridors really, really light up. And you can even, you can have a camera on a travel corridor that has a scrape or maybe even a signpost rub, and it's been pretty dead this year. But most likely you haven't had those prime weather days when these bucks are making those big jaunts. I hunt those spots based more on past experiences versus even fresh intel. But sometimes if I'm seeing that we only got a couple good prime days of weather, I'm only going to hunt that spot twice because we got that warm front coming up. These bucks are going to get bogged down, and I'm going to hunt more warmer weather setups. So a lot of it's based on. Really, a lot of our hunting is based on weather, especially temperature as well.
That brings to mind another situation. I feel like a lot of the weather conversation helps inform people like when they make their strikes or how aggressive they get with their strikes, right? There's some folks that'll, play it really conservatively until you get that good cold weather. Then you make a strike, deep into the kill zone. And then when it's hotter days, they're going to play it more conservatively. I'm curious though, one of the things that can shift someone's strategy or perspective would be if they knew they weren't the only ones hunting that buck. Yep. I think this can be a situation where, folks share private property with other guys, or if they hunt in a place where there's just a lot of hunting pressure, or they hunt public land where it's fair game for everyone. What happens if you've got, a target buck that you're really, really interested in, it's on public land, and you've got a plan and you're after him, but then you bump into some other guys at the trailhead and they show you pictures and like, yeah, man, I'm after this deer. Yeah. And you find out that there's like a guy or two in the zone that's kind of on the same deer. What do you do in that situation? Does that change your strategy? Does that change how aggressive you are or anything at all?
The good thing is I've ran into these guys, and a lot of times I may not jump right out and tell them where I'm hunting, but I might. What I'll say is, I just don't want to get in your guy's way. I try to play dumb, although if it's a local guy, not bragging, but he probably knows Steve Sherk's hunting that deer too.
Yeah.
But I try to play a little dumb and be like, I'm not real, familiar with this area, guys. I just want to make sure that, I'm not hunting where you're at, and try to figure out what they're doing and, where they're going. And as long as they're doing something different than me, I'm going to hunt that deer definitely. I'll say, a lot of the deer I have on camera, they're not secrets. It's public land. A lot of other people have these deer on camera too. But I'm always trying to figure out, how these other people are hunting these deer and, and go from there. And that's why early on I was big about, finding those harder to access areas, a little bit more remote. It doesn't mean that these deer are secrets, but a lot of these people a lot of people say, Steve, how do you get so many daytime pictures? That's because I'm finding deer and I'm learning deer, in these areas that nobody's really going. These bucks, in the middle of the night, they may go several miles from their core area. A lot of these people are getting these bucks at midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, and then they're going in the woods, 500 yards thinking that buck's there, and they have no clue they're 2 to 3 miles off. So, just trying to figure out what everyone else is doing, and staying away from them, because if they have a pattern to what they're doing, the mature deer has already got them figured out. He'll go in that area at night and he's not going to be bothered at all, but he's going to stay back, quite a ways where nobody else has been going. And that's going to be the place where I plan to hunt.
Okay, another camera situation. And this one just kind of popped in my mind, but it's a thing that you hear about every once in a while. I've kind of had this kind of thing happen. where you've got a buck that you're kind of closing in on and you're getting daylight pictures of him, but every time you go into hunt, you don't see him. And then like the next day you're not in there hunting, and then he daylights, and he daylights the next day. And then you check your camera 4 days later, or you got cell cameras or whatever it is, and you say, like, oh shoot, he was daylighting. And then you go in and hunt him again, and then you don't see him. But then the next day when you're not there, he's daylighting. So you got a buck that's daylighting when you're not there, but you can't seem to get on him when you're there. What do you do in that situation? Do you think that it's you? Do you think it's just luck or happenstance that he happens to just not be showing up on the right days and you just need to be there more? How do you approach that?
I would go into that thinking that deer was on to me. I wouldn't give up on the deer. I'd, maybe set up a couple 100 yards differently. This is something too. I like the question because I've had it happen to me several times. It starts to make sense when every time you're not there, that deer's showing up or pretty consistently. And I think that happens a lot. You think you might know where that deer's bedding, and he might also know where your stand is, and he's just bedding downwind to that every time. He may adjust every time too, just to make sure he's downwind to that spot. It could easily happen, especially if you've went in there pretty often and you're checking that camera quite often. He's got a pretty good idea that, okay, there's a hunter, there's someone coming in here fairly often, and I need to pay attention to this. But the good thing is that deer's sticking around. He hasn't disappeared, and you just got to go in there and surprise him. Once again, that's why I love mobile hunting and not so much of a fixed stand person. Is you want to keep these deer, especially mature bucks, you want to keep them guessing to what you're doing as well. Like I said, I don't think you're going to have to leave that entire area 100, 200, 300 yards of an adjustment. I think that deer would be surprised. And if I'm continuing to get pictures of that deer, in fact, that camera, if that deer keeps coming to that camera, I can keep checking it every few days too, but then I would bank off of what I'm seeing that deer do. If he is coming from the same direction, or if there's, like I said before, if there's any bit of consistent knowledge you're getting from a deer on your camera, keep using that, keep basing your next hunt off of those pictures. So I would use that camera as more of an inventory or an intel camera, and I'd keep basing my setups off of that and keep mixing up my setups too. Even if I went in there another time and I hunted that deer once or twice and didn't see him, I would just keep within that area, but I probably wouldn't keep hunting the same tree. Just keep bouncing around. Sooner or later, I think you're going to get in front of them.
What if I did this? What if I took all of your trail cameras away and you had 0 cameras for this hunting season? How would you kill a buck in that situation? Like, how would your plan change?
Well, can I say that I had cameras in the past, or I've never had cameras?
I think I'd be more interested in if you never had camera information. Because I kind of want to see, for someone who, I'm imagining there's somebody listening right now who maybe only has a couple cameras. They can't afford 150 cameras. And so they're thinking, man, how does Steve get it done in these places, if he didn't have all that information? So I'm kind of curious. Let's just go extreme here and say you don't have any, and maybe this is a newer place, so you just don't have that historical information from them. Yeah. What would you do then?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be, I'd be depressed, don't get me wrong. I'd hate to use cameras, but it would also be kind of exciting too, just for the fact that I always know what's in the area. So it would be like every time I'd be going into a hunt, it'd be like Christmas morning. But I'd use all the same things I'm still using now. Just, I'd be still, if it was, I guess it depends on what time of year it would be. Just similar to the answer I gave you before, if it's early October, I'm looking for, sign on the edge of bedding. If it was more in the rut, I'd probably focus more where I'm seeing does and still keeping, out of the way other hunters, trying to find more overlooked areas. Still a lot of boots on the ground scouting too. The only thing that those cameras are really doing for me is really teaching me, about individual bucks. But, I still have decent woodsman skills. I still do a lot of things similar to what a lot of other people are doing that, aren't running trail cameras. But a lot of it's just based on time of the year. But, I definitely scout heavily, and that's what I would do. A lot of boots on the ground stuff. And, you can have success without trail cameras.
For sure. All right. We're at the last phase of the gauntlet, which is the rapid fire questions. Okay. I've got, I think, 5 or 6 quick questions here. I just need like a 1-word answer. No explanation allowed. And then I'll end it with one last doozy in which you can explain yourself. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Rapid fire begins now. Would you take a 50-yard shot at a whitetail with your bow? Yes or no?
No.
If you could only have one of these tools for the rest of your hunts for the rest of your life, would it be a set of rattling antlers or a grunt tube?
Grunt tube.
Expandable or fixed blade broadheads?
Fixed blade.
Should you stop a moving buck before shooting with a bow?
Yes.
Does the moon matter to deer movement?
Minimal.
Okay. If you could only hunt mornings or evenings this coming season, which one would you take?
Can I at least ask what time of year? Or not?
It's for the whole season. The whole season.
All right, morning.
Gee, mornings. Okay. All right. So here's the doozy. Let's say that I rule the world and I have control over your hunting privileges. I'm going to take away your right to hunt for the rest of your life unless you kill a 5.5-year-old buck or older this coming season. The problem is I'm only going to let you hunt one day and from one location. So you have one day and one stand site in order to kill a 5.5-year-old buck this year. Tell me the date on the calendar you would pick, and then describe to me in as much detail as possible your best possible hypothetical stand site for this situation, for that day.
Well, does it have to be a specific date, or could it be a time frame with a weather event, or does it just have to be a certain date?
I would say pick a date, but I'll let you be a little loose with the facts. And if you want to say, but I want this weather, I'll give that to you because I don't want to be too mean.
Because I do have I like to hunt individual deer like from October 15th to close to Halloween before they really break out in range. In fact, I have several spots picked from that October 15th, towards the end of October period, but a lot of that's going to be based on weather fronts. But the first weather front we get around mid-October, I'll explain a couple of these spots. They're pretty close to buck bedding. They're all on active scrapes. Like I mentioned before, on the fringes of buck bedding. That's a special time of year when, I call it like scrape season. I'd say that mid to late October period, there's probably no other time throughout 365 days a year that bucks are working scrapes as much. And you can kind of pattern bucks on these scrapes. I'm not saying they're hitting the same scrape every day. That's when I love to use my 3-day strategy the most. You'll have scrapes that a buck's coming to maybe 2 to 3 times a week in the daylight. And those are the spots that I'm hunting, maybe 3 afternoons in a row based on what I'm seeing on those cameras. If I'm seeing more consistency in the morning or evening, I'll base whether I'm going to hunt morning or evening on that deer, and I'll give it 3 sits in a row. Then I move on to a different deer. But most of my hunting, I will say, is based on weather fronts, cold fronts especially. I have, those, I don't want to say magical spots, but some really good spots that I have a lot of confidence in. But instead of, getting excited and jumping the gun too quick, I wait till the time's right. And, in that, I've had most of my success. A lot of people are surprised, but from like October 18th to Halloween is when I've killed most of my bucks. It's mainly using that strategy, incorporating prime weather, on these scrapes and on the fringe of these bedding areas, like that's just been a deadly tactic for me. The biggest thing is some years you don't get those weather fronts.
Right.
And, that's what's tough being, a fair weather hunter is, you never know. Every year is going to be different. It's funny, the year before last in, 2021, our best stretch of activity was November 1st to like the 6th. 2022, that was the absolute worst time. So you just, from one year to the next, you don't know. And that was mainly based on weather. So, but that's what I would be doing. In fact, I was just scouting the other day. What I've been going in like this time of year, July, August, and because I leave cameras at these spots year round, just for the most part. So these bucks are used to the camera as well. And I'll go in about this time of year and just clear some brush and just make sure everything's clear, because about this time of year is when everything in the woods has reached like maximum growth. And, you'd be surprised. I went to cameras the other day and they're just completely covered up with brush and stuff. So, but I've already got all my spots pretty much set up for that time period. And now it's just a waiting game, and pray the weather gods are going to work with me this October.
Mm-hmm. Man, well, if that was the case and I had your hunting privileges on the line, I would be crossing all my fingers and toes for you. And with that, Steve, you made it through the gauntlet. Thanks for doing that. I enjoyed it. Before I let you go, though, can you give folks a quick rundown of where they can follow along with anything you've got going on, how they can contact you about the guide service, anything else like that?
Yep. You can find me on social media, Facebook or Instagram. You might be able to see on my shirt here, it's Sherk's Guide Service, SHERK''S. I don't have a website anymore. It's one of those things, I never thought it was going to be what it is. And I was getting so many phone calls that I just had to find a way to cut back.
Wow.
However, this year I do still have some spots. I don't know when you're going to air this, but we do have a few spots, few openings this coming season. So if someone's interested in doing a mountain buck hunt here in northwestern PA on public land, can definitely get a hold of me on Facebook or Instagram. And honestly, thanks so much for having me. I was honored to get to chat with you. I've been following you for years. So this was one of my, I would say, one of a little more challenging podcasts, but probably the most fun. And I'd be willing to do it any other time, to say the least.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, right back at you. We'll definitely have to stay in touch, and I'll be keeping tabs this fall. Hopefully, you'll be putting another one or two in the truck, and I'm sure you will. So, good luck, and thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Good luck to you as well.
All right, and that is a wrap. Thank you again for showing up for this, listening to this, enjoying this with me. I am raring to go. I'm actually heading out right now to hang some trail cameras and do some scouting on a new piece. So exciting times all around. I will leave you with one more heads up. After I finish my conversation with Steve, he did mention that he has a couple more openings available with Sherk's Guide Service this coming fall in that mid-November time period. That's the only slot that's open right now. Get a hold of him through Facebook, like he mentioned, and you might be able to get one of the last couple spots available with Sherk's Guide Service. As you heard today, Steve's a wealth of information. He's going to teach you some great stuff. He's going to put you in a place where you'll have some great opportunities, and I imagine it's going to be a whole lot of fun too. So give Steve a shout, and in the meantime, best of luck out there if you are doing some summer scouting, some summer prep, some habitat work, whatever it is. Get it done now, because the season is just around the corner, and I cannot wait. So, until then, thank you, and stay wired to hunt.
Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right, join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live, headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay, every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Arts Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.